Hello everyone, this is RC053 and I'm bringing you a new Wargamer Dragon Guide, and this one's going to be specifically based on logistics units. Now, this is a new series where I'm going to go in depth on certain types of units. In this case, we're going to be doing the command units. Now, the purpose of command units, if you haven't played Wargame or are new to the series, it's to capture zones. There are a bunch of zones along the map, and you'll need command units to capture them. Now, the purpose of command zones is basically to get income. Whether that be points to put towards your military, or if you're in destruction mode, that is, or if it's in conquest, then you're going to be getting conquest points. And that's how you win the game in conquest. Now, first looking at the wheeled CVs, usually these are what you see deployed the most. You know, command infantry is pretty popular, but these are the cheapest and usually the most spammable, if not the most spammable, you know, sort of command unit. So these command units are very useful for just capturing any territory you need captured. I would keep them away from very contested zones or zones that might fall under imminent attack. Those are really the only limiting, I guess you could say, circumstances for these units, because they don't really, these wheeled units, the Jeeps anyways, they don't carry any armor on them. They're just flat out Jeeps, which means that they're going to be vulnerable to small arms, they're going to be vulnerable to RPGs, and they're going to be vulnerable especially to artillery, which is likely. If you're in a contested zone where the enemy's trying to push, perhaps they might be dropping rocket artillery or normal just artillery, so you're going to be seeing a lot of that. So that's really what these guys are meant for. They're just cheap, spammable command units, though they're usually enough in most games. Unless you're playing an enormous map, then this will usually be plenty. The next one that I'm going to touch on is going to be the, kind of these APCs. You know, so they are technically armored, just not very well. They can be good, though, because they are faster, for example, than the Humvee is. This one is also amphibious. Some are not. But they can be pretty decent, because they are pretty mobile. So yeah, some of these APCs can be pretty useful in the right situations. Now, moving on to the helicopters. Helicopters are certainly my least recommended type of command. Take any type of command in here, but please don't take command helicopters. They have a very limited use on the battlefield. Now, you might be wondering, well, this is pretty good, because you get, you know, they're usually pretty spammable, if you will, as in, you know, they're usually come in, you know, at the same availability as, say, the Jeeps do, but they're also, I guess people make the case that they're faster, and so thus they're superior for the same price. But that's not the entire case, because helicopters, while they can land, and they must land to secure the zone, you cannot put them in a forest. Humvee CPs, you know, the M151A1 CPs, while they may be weak, you can hide them. Any of the ground-based CVs can be hidden. Command helicopters, of course, cannot be hidden, because it's pretty tough to land a helicopter in a forest. And so it's definitely not hidden, and so once you see them, they're usually very easy to engage and thus very easy to kill. So I would not recommend using command helicopters. If you want command helicopters, or something with the mobility of a helicopter, but being able to be concealed like some of any other CV, take command infantry in a helicopter. For example, you can take it in the same Huey, only one that's actually better with TACCOM coming in the Huey. You can do something like this. I would recommend taking something faster, say the Twin Huey, or perhaps the Blackhawk. So you know, you could take them in any of those CVs. I don't like taking them in a transport. I personally don't like that. Now, if you're on a map where, you know, the enemy could be deploying a lot of anti-aircraft, and it's a very small map, I can definitely get this. You know, it's not that there's never a purpose for taking in a ground-based command, but if you want the maximum amount of mobility for your command unit, then command infantry can be a great way to go. And they're also, they're a 5-strength team. I would recommend turning the weapons off, though, because if they're in a precarious position, then the enemy might come in with vehicles, or they might come in with helicopters. And even if they come in infantry, then the TACOM isn't going to be able to do much to defend itself anyways, and it's much better to keep it concealed by turning off the weapons. So that's the TACOM for you. I definitely like command infantry, but I usually go with, the wheeled Jeep sort of CVs. And then there's, of course, more, like, heavily armored CVs. Now, the armored CVs, what I would call the armored CVs, that's going to be like your M114, the the M577, and then, these are kind of your cheaper armored units, if you will. So looking at something like the M577, the advantages of this are that it does have some armor on it, so it can take a hit if it has to. But don't confuse armor for meaning that this can be particularly survivable. For example, the M577 is, while it is more survivable than, the Humvee, it still is not as... One, you lose some of the mobility of it, which is an issue, but it also isn't going to stand up too well to artillery if it gets hit directly. Now, once again, you can hide it, and that's one of the important things that you do with command units, but this is some of the issues that you might have with it. It's not as heavily armored as a command tank, but it's more heavily armored than a Humvee CP or M151A1 CP. So, you have all of that to take into consideration. That's one of the things about war games. You have to weigh those options. Now, their availability is going to be somewhere between, like, 3 and, 7, so they might be, like, 4, 5, or 6 of them. It just depends on the nation. So, that's usually how many you're going to get. Now, next, moving on to the very heavily armored command tanks. Command tanks can be either used extremely well in Conquest, or in a destruction game mode to maximize your points, or extremely poorly in an offensive role. Command tanks are the best units for holding down a contested zone, unless it requires a degree of subtlety, in which case it would be much better to use a TACOM. But if it's something that doesn't require subtlety, that's out the window, but you need to secure it, take a command tank. Command tanks give you a very armored command. For example, this M60, you have 9 frontal armor on it. But the issue is that many beginning players, and I'm not saying this to rag on beginners, because, beginners, war game's a tough game to learn. But beginners will confuse having an armor and being a command unit for being instantly as good as tanks. There are much cheaper options if you want to take this tank. So do not use a command tank in a frontline role. This becomes the most confusing when people take like a command M1 Abrams. They associate tank with invincible and not tank as something that's more armored but still extremely vulnerable. Tanks are still extremely vulnerable on the battlefield. Just because they're encased in a bunch of armor doesn't mean that they're invincible. Maybe the small arms fire, but not to cluster munitions, not to airburst, which are the same thing, but not to RPGs, not to ATGMs most certainly, or to aircraft or to helicopters. So, command tanks are definitely not invincible and should not in any way be used in an offensive role, or to spearhead an assault. Keep them always in the rear of a column if you have to advance and capture zones rapidly. But the command M1 Abrams is best used, one of the better units to capture contested zones. I know that maybe came across as a bit of a rant, but please do not use this in an aggressive role, and don't forget to provide support for it. If you've already lost the zone because you've lost your offensive units, don't think bringing command tank is going to solve that issue. If you want to see an example of this maybe happening, it would be in my Motorized Madness gameplay, when my opponents brought in a command M1 Abrams to take a zone, but they didn't have control of the zone. Command units should really only be brought in Under normal situations, they should only be brought in when you have a zone pretty secure or mostly locked down. When you might be dealing with some lighter units, or units that you have good counters for and aren't as much of a threat. But that doesn't mean, that these can't be brought in when you're not in control. And that's really what command tanks are there for, is when you're not in control of that zone. That doesn't mean use it willy-nilly, but if you're fighting for a zone and you're doing pretty well and you can protect a certain area, then in a conquest game, bringing in a command tank isn't a bad idea, because that means more points for your side. However, as command tanks are expensive and very limited, you'll usually only get 3 command tanks. If you're playing as some of the Eastern Bloc countries, you'll get maybe 5 with the T-55 variants. Not the best command tanks, but they'll do. They're also relatively cheap at 120 points, but once again, command tank does not equal totally awesome and survivable. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed and found this deck guide, not deck guide, but this unit guide useful. If you liked the video or you found it useful, please share it out, and please remember to like and subscribe for my wargame content. This is RC0538 signing off. Have a good day.